Childish pranks often carry unforeseen consequences, as many young individuals engage in potentially perilous games without considering the risks involved. It is crucial for children to receive assistance in accurately evaluating the level of danger associated with these activities. In many cases, parents remain oblivious to their children's actions, as kids are aware of their wrongdoings but hesitate to admit them. Each time children indulge in prohibited behavior, they expose themselves to various risks, including the potential for severe harm or even fatality. Regrettably, children rarely contemplate these hazards, as they wholeheartedly surrender to the allure of their childhood fantasies and excitement. In today's story, we will discuss an incident involving children that could have resulted in the loss of their lives if nature had not intervened. On that particular day, a wild animal displayed behavior inconsistent with its species, astonishing the onlookers. Had circumstances unfolded even slightly differently, too fewer children would exist on this earth. February winters are renowned for their unpredictable nature. In numerous northern regions, frost begins to relent, and the river ice starts to thin as the latter half of winter approaches. Consequently, people tend to avoid walking across the river and opt for bridges, even if it requires a significant detour. Adults are well aware of these precautions and diligently avoid perilous sections of the river. However, children often disregard these rules. They believe that if there is ice on the river, it must be sturdy enough to support their little bodies effortlessly. On that February morning in 1983, two boys decided not to go to school where their parents had sent them, but to skip school and go sledding. Many school children at their age neglect parental prohibitions and do rash acts, but on that day, they could not imagine what such disobedience would turn out to be for them. After waiting for their parents to leave for work in the morning, the boys put on fur coats, took their sleds and book bags for plausibility, and went to play instead of school. They lived in a distant village surrounded by high hills and trees. There were plenty of places to ride their sleds, but that day they decided to find a new place for entertainment. They went far from their house to find the highest slope, which had fewer trees that could prevent them from sliding down the hill at high speed without hindrance. After a while, they found the ideal place in their opinion. The slope was relatively high. There were a few trees along the way, and at the foot of the mountain there was an icy river for their own reassurance. They ran a couple of times out onto the ice of the river to make sure that the ice was strong enough, and they happily started riding their sleds. The area was quite deserted, and they shouted and laughed loudly, not fearing that some adults might notice them and scold them and take them home to their parents. And only behind a row of trees was a snow-covered road along which occasional cars drove and rare passers-by passed, but there was no way to see them from the road. They were hidden from prying eyes by thick branches of trees. The boys frolicked tartly for about an hour. They tirelessly drove down the mountain and climbed it again. Then they finally got bored, and they decided to go down the hill together because then the speed would be higher and twice the fun. One of the boys sat down more comfortably in the sled, and the second settled in behind, taking hold of the first one more tightly, and began accelerating the sled to gain more speed. He was pushing the sled in front of him, and he himself ran faster and faster after them. And in the end, when the sled was going so faster that he barely had time to run after them, he jumped right on top of the first boy, and they rushed down the mountain with a loud laugh at great speed. The sled was carried from the hill to the river. They managed to hear a crunch under them, but they couldn't do anything about it. The ice crunched very loudly under the runners and eventually cracked. They fell through the ice at full speed. The sled instantly went to the bottom, but the boys began to flounder in the icy water trying to get out of their frozen captivity. The water immediately soaked them through and through. The already heavy winter clothes became a heavy stone to pull them down. In addition, it was tough to breathe because the icy water pressed very hard on their lungs. They tried to scream as best they could, but only managed to emit hoarse groans at this moment. One of the boys remembered how his father once told him that a man who falls into ice-cold water in winter could withstand a maximum of 15 minutes before he finally freezes, and a child even less. They frantically grabbed for life and for ice. Still, if you've ever seen people fall through the ice, you probably understand that the edge of the ice is constantly breaking off under the weight of the human body, and it becomes almost impossible to get out of it. About 3 minutes passed, and for them it seemed like an eternity. By then they were already tired of desperately floundering in the icy water and just crying in silence, not knowing what to do next. They understood that if no one came to their aid in the immediate future, they were doomed. Then one of the boys saw in the distance a large dog that was very quickly approaching them. He shouted to his brother that the dog must have heard their cry and was now leading some adult to help and would soon arrive. The boys had a sincere hope that now some man would come out of the forest, quickly run to their aid and pull them out of the water, but except for the dog, no one came out of the woods to meet them. As the boys watched in terror, they realized that the approaching creature was not a dog but a massive wolf, rapidly closing in on them. Panic seized them, and they felt helpless, knowing that escaping from the wolf in their current position would be nearly impossible. However, to their astonishment, as the wolf reached the edge of the ice, it lay down and began sniffing. With utmost care, it grabbed one of the boys by the collar of his fur coat and gently pulled him out of the water. Overwhelmed by fear and freezing cold, the boy could no longer resist and silently yielded to the strength of the wild beast. The wolf, displaying incredible physical power, effortlessly rescued the first boy from the icy waters. Without wasting a precious moment, the rescued boy hurried to aid his brother. He discovered a fallen tree nearby, broke off a large branch, and extended it to his sibling, who was still struggling in the freezing river. Summoning his last ounces of strength, the drowning boy clung tightly to the makeshift ladder as his brother persistently pulled him to safety. After a few intense minutes of determined effort, the second boy reached the shore. Exhausted, they collapsed on the riverbank, gazing at the sky in disbelief and overwhelming relief that they had managed to escape the clutches of the water. Their thoughts then turned to the wolf, and they scanned their surroundings, but the magnificent creature had vanished without a trace. The boys rose to their feet, supporting each other, and made their way to the roadside, where a passing truck stopped to pick them up. They shared with the driver the harrowing experience they had just endured. The kind-hearted driver offered them hot tea from his thermos, covered them with his travel blanket, providing some much-needed warmth. He then drove them back to their village and handed them over to their relieved parents. As the parents listened to the children's account of the day's events, they were filled with a mix of horror and immense joy that everything had ended well. They grappled with conflicting emotions, wanting to scold their children for disobeying, skipping school, and venturing alone to an unfamiliar and distant place without permission. Word of the incident spread throughout the village, with the elderly residents attributing the boys' rescue to the intervention of their departed relatives, taking the form of a wolf. They held a deep belief in this possibility. Others, more skeptical, suggested that the boys fabricated the wolf aspect of the story to garner attention, as children their age often have vivid imaginations and enjoy inventing tales. However, the local biology teacher offered an alternative hypothesis. According to the teacher, the wolf may have mistaken the boys for its own kin due to their fur coats resembling animal skins. Regardless of the reason behind it, the boys were incredibly fortunate to have survived that fateful day.